Hey, Andrew the Beta64 guy here, letting you know that Beta64 is back with new episodes on this channel every single month. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, tell your mom Beta64 is here to stay. Now, enjoy the video. Brain Age is a series that I adore. And I'm being completely serious. I've been playing these games since the Nintendo DS all the way up until the Nintendo Switch one. Yes, I actually imported a physical copy of the Japanese version of Brain Age for the Switch that was not released in the US. Who hasn't? Well, anyway, out of all the games in the series, my favorite has to be Brain Age Concentration Training for the Nintendo 3DS. The series went from basic puzzles with a little funny head guy floating around to a fully voice-acted training tool with tons of games and unlocks for those of you who are brave enough to get past like 3 days in it. And what do I mean by brave? Let's just say there's a reason he looks a bit devilish. And I'm going to tell you everything about its development, including a ton of interesting facts about Kawashima and the Brain Age series in general. So get your brain ready to learn all about the development of Brain Age Concentration Training. Okay.
Brain Age Concentration Training, or translated from Japanese directly, Tohoku University Institute of Aging Sciences Professor and Supervising Director Ryuta Kawashima's extreme brain training with 5 minutes of Oni training began its development way before its release in 2013. In fact, to get the full picture on the development of Brain Age Concentration Training, I'd like to go all the way back to November of 2003, which was around 2 years before the release of the first ever Brain Age game on the DS. This was when Dr. Kawashima's work was first discovered by Nintendo, specifically Iwata, the president of Nintendo at the time. But how exactly was Kawashima found? Why, by another extremely long title of work he helped produce called Kawashima's Train Your Brain Calculation Drills for Adults, 60 Days of Simple Calculation. This book, along with another book by Kawashima, Train Your Brain Reading Aloud Drills for Adults, 60 Days of Reading Famous Works Aloud and Taking Kanji Diction, were published by Kumon Publishing in November of 2003 and began gaining quite a bit of popularity. So much so that Iwata picked up a book for himself and while trying out some of the drills, found it to be quite enjoyable. That's when, bing bing, the idea came to him. What if this book was a video game? Iwata decided to research this Kawashima and found him to be roughly the same age and previously in the same year of school at the same time as him. Was this fate? Iwata decided to take this chance and ask Kawashima to meet in person to discuss a potential video game. But Iwata wasn't just going to show up with an idea drawn on a napkin. No. On December 2nd, 2004, the same day the DS released, by the way, Iwata and Kawashima met together, and Iwata brought along with him an already functional prototype of the game that would later become the first Brain Age. Kawashima was initially guarded, but after chatting with Iwata and discovering they were both kind of on the same wavelength with a lot in common, this quick 30-minute meeting became a 3-hour conversation among friends. But just because they had a fun, enjoyable conversation, that wasn't enough to get Kawashima on board completely. It had to be proven to be at least somewhat effective first. So Kawashima asked Iwata to let him borrow the prototype software for further testing in the laboratory. There he could actually measure if it had any effect on the brain, and only if it did would he give him approval for it to be made into a full game. And as you can probably guess, his findings showed an actual increase in brain activity. So he gave the game a green light and development for it began. But what exactly is this quote-unquote brain activity that's being measured for the game? Well, Brain Age was specifically designed to simulate one's memory processing speed, and later experiments even showed that it helped boost brain capacity as well as other various cognitive functions. Training exercises for the game were chosen very deliberately, based on how much burden was placed on the brain via optical topography in order to heighten those potential benefits. Iwata went on record stating that many of the exercises that were made for Brain Age 1 were discarded, and that there were some exercises that should logically have stimulated the brain, but then the development team was told by Kawashima that they actually caused it to cool down, which of course would not be very good for training. But in the end, they were able to make enough games that burdened the brain and release Brain Age in Japan in May of 2005. But while they were developing it, Kawashima decided to also work with Sega on something called the Brain Power Trainer, which was essentially a Game & Watch for brain training. There are quite a few of these made, like Reading Aloud Edition, a jigsaw puzzle, and one that was just trading cards with math on them. And they were a hit, selling over 200,000 sets in total. But would Brain Age by Nintendo find a similar success to Brain Power Trainer by Sega? Oh yeah, it did. And honestly, it's not really much of a surprise. Kawashima figured it would sell well since it was a Nintendo-developed game, and Iwata was confident from the very beginning that it would be a smash hit with gamers. Oh. But the fact that it was purchased by many people as their first game ever came as a shock. Now, does the game actually work though? Okay, that's the question everybody has. From 2004 to 2006, there were really no theories on whether or not brain training actually did anything at all. The first Brain Age game stated that it would stimulate the prefrontal area of the brain, and that was actually proven. Optical topography did show an increase in blood flow in the brain when someone was playing Brain Age. However, other games released around that time on PCs claimed to also stimulate the brain, but when actually tested, it didn't, at least not to the level that Brain Age did. Because you not only had to read a math problem, calculate it, but also answer it physically on the DS touchscreen, the burden put on the brain was escalated. And that just wasn't possible on a PC typing it in. Now, whether it actually had any lasting effects, that had yet to be tested or even theorized at the time. But let's get out all this science stuff. Let's fast forward to fall of 2005. Sales of Brain Age were doing so well that Iwata had an idea. Let's sell Brain Age worldwide. From that point on, it was his personal mission that this little brain training game got released outside of Japan. He even went in person to Nintendo sales reps in America and Europe to personally explain what the game was and collaborate with them to build a market for it. Kawashima, on the other hand, thought things a little bit differently. He considered the game to be more suited for the quote-unquote Japanese temperament, and had heard people claim that diligently chipping away at calculation drills were the way of the samurai. As if I don't know the way of the samurai. Look at me. Do I look like someone who doesn't know the way of the samurai? Iwata obviously did not feel the same way as Kawashima, pointing to the fact that the publisher of Kawashima's books was already selling reading, writing, and arithmetic books outside of Japan. And guess who was right? Not Kawashima, because the game finally released in Europe on June 9th, 2006, and it sold extremely well. In fact, its sales surpassed Japan's, and even became somewhat of a social phenomenon in Europe. Now, what on earth does this have to do with concentration training? We've already been like multiple minutes in this video without talking about the 3DS. The 3DS hadn't even come out yet at this point. But this is the important part. Things were starting to slow down for the Brain Age series. By the end of 2007, Brain Age had 2 games in the series, both released worldwide. There would later be some DSiWare releases in 2008 and 2009 called Brain Age Express, but those were just repackaged versions of the first 2 games with some new puzzles. But Dr. Kawashima was still busy in the game market, just not with Nintendo. He had licensed his name out to a different company, Bandai Namco. Starting in November of 2006, Nintendo was put on the back burner for a mobile game from Bandai Namco called Whole Brain Training, which was available for iMode and later Yahoo mobile phones for a monthly fee of 315 yen. And it was even updated over time with new games. Ooh, fancy. But this was only the beginning for Kawashima's other games. Welcome to Whole Brain Training for Everyone, the arcade game. Starting on December 21st, 2006, you could walk over to the nearest game center to test your wits in various brain training exercises by yourself or with 4 others. And you could also get a physical training card so you could save your data, compete for high scores with others around the country, and customize your assistant. Now, who would you pick as your assistant? Anime girl? Animals? US Army man? And why not use the official brain exercise with Dr. Kawashima wallpaper on your PC at home? Thank goodness, I just could not remember what day of the week March 17th, 2007 was on. And while you're at home, why not try out the free demo of the arcade game on this webpage to practice for the real deal cabinet? Just be aware this is not verified by Dr. Kawashima, so, results may vary. everything was also connected together so you could view your stats online, and in November 2007, they even created an easy web version so you could train your brain even more on the go. Not to mention, that same year, Bandai Namco released a Java ME brain training game outside of Japan in Europe, with 10 minigames pulled from the Japanese games. And then there was more brain exercise with Dr. Kawashima, which came out around 2008. And in 2009, Brain Exercise with Dr. Kawashima released for PC with a big, scientifically proven sticker right on the front so you know it's legit. It's funny because they aren't allowed to reference Nintendo's Brain Age or Brain Training, so they just say this game was supervised by the mastermind behind the world-famous game of the century. As you can clearly see, Bandai Namco is having an absolute field day with Dr. Kawashima Brain Training. In 2009, there was Whole Brain Training Thorough Diagnosis for Yahoo Mobile, and after that, hold on a second. Yeah, okay, they just stopped. Despite porting Thorough Diagnosis to EasyWeb in April of 2010, in September that same year, they just shut down the arcade cabinets, the link content on the mobile sites, and pretty much didn't touch the brand after that. Well, except for new brain training that's answered with the body for the Kinect release in 2010 as well. Yeah, that was a thing. Anyway, that was all a long-winded way to say that time period from the release of Brain Age 2 up until 2009, Nintendo and Dr. Kawashima really didn't do much together at all. He was content with Bandai Namco and even dipped into Sega's headquarters to give his name to the Brain Training Portable 1 and 2 for the PSP, released in 2005 and 2006 respectively.
But what about Brain Age concentration training on the Nintendo 3DS? Well, that's exactly what started taking shape in 2009, thanks to the Winter Olympics. Now, what does brain training have to do with sliding down the ice at approximately 100 miles per hour? Well, a lot, actually.
So that thing with the sled and the ice, that thing, yeah, that's called the skeleton. Had no idea before this video. Back in the day, I always called it the fast ice sled thing, but anyway, Kawashima had a theory about this. Could training the brain of the athletes performing the skeleton improve their performance? But I'm not talking just any old training. I'm specifically talking about working memory capacity training. Working memory is defined as the retention of small amounts of information in a readily accessible form and could be considered the root of high-level brain functions. You gotta think of it as like a RAM in a computer. It's temporary and it can't hold as much as your internal drive, but it's pretty dang fast. So if you can improve the speed of access to that memory in your brain, or maybe the amount of memory that it could hold, theoretically, it should boost various brain capabilities. So Kawashima went back to Nintendo and asked them to make a special version of Brain Age specifically designed to train the working memory of the candidates for the Winter Olympics. And what did Nintendo say after he left them for so long? They said, yeah, of course, no problem. And they got to work converting Brain Age to this different style of training. See, the original Brain Age was designed to improve the processing speed of working memory, but using something called end-back exercises, they attempted to improve the capacity of working memory too. By constantly forcing the user to memorize answers that were 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 questions back, theoretically, this forces the brain to remember more in working memory. Nintendo sent Kawashima the Brain Age end-back prototype, and his theory was finally able to be put to the test in the real world, and it worked. According to the tests the team did, all the athletes showed signs of improved abilities, with one athlete's performance even improving so rapidly that she was successfully selected for the Olympic team. Kawashima was elated. The potential here was so great, and he wanted Nintendo to help him bring this new type of training to the world. So right before the Olympics began in February of 2010, Kawashima approached Nintendo with a proposal, making that prototype into a full game designed around training your working memory. And they completely agreed and began work on the game we like to call Brain Age Concentration Training. Now, this was early 2010. Concentration training didn't release until mid-2012. So that's almost 3 years. And at that time, they already had the prototype too. The first Brain Age only took 5 months to go from prototype proposal to release. So what took so long for the 3DS game? Well, it is a lot of things, but mostly it's because the people hated it. Training working memory is tough. Some studies even say that it's kind of fixed, but training this part of the brain every day has been shown to improve it, at least temporarily. With concentration training, this time the developers actually had scientific backing on their side to create a game that proved truly useful, especially to Dr. Kawashima. He wasn't afraid to admit that age had slowed down his brain somewhat, so a game where he could dedicate to training his working memory and could actually help him stay ahead of these new young graduate students, well, that's a dream come true. Sure, studies showed that younger people had greater benefits to gain from this kind of capacity training, but whatever, any improvement is good. What wasn't good though was that the developers hated this training. Now, imagine debugging a game, playing the same Mario level over and over. Oh, that's doable, that's fine. Bing, bing, wahoo, you know how it is. But now imagine having to bug test a game where you have to remember the answers to 7 different equations simultaneously. It was rough. The game was specifically designed to constantly push you to your limits, and the developers needed breaks, several breaks, just to regain motivation to test the dang thing. Kitamura was one of the directors of the game and seriously thought they'd be done making it within 3 to 4 months of Kawashima's proposal and release it for the DS then. But they just couldn't do it. Why? Because they just couldn't figure out how to make it fun. The other Brain Age games were fun, but concentration training was a literal workout every day for at least 5 minutes a day. Now explain to me how you're gonna convince grandma or the rad skateboarding teens down at the park to pay for a game that's specifically designed to hurt. Not to mention, at the same time, the 3DS was being developed and staff members from all corners of the office were being sent over there, like Kawamoto, who is the producer of concentration training and the initial programmer behind the prototype for the Olympics. They were sent over to work on Street Pass Me Plaza, as you may remember from my 3DS video, which you should watch after this, wink wink. Takahashi, the other producer of concentration training, was also sent over to the 3DS team, meaning that Kitamura was taking the lead on brainstorming sessions. Without the producers there trying to, reel in the ideas, kind of make a concrete vision, what followed was 6 months of wild and crazy ideas.
Well, here's a few that I've got written down. An expansive story with simulation gameplay. Ooh. Training a bird to make them into a real bird brain. Training a robot and enhancing their circuitry. You meet an ultra cute anime girl and she asks you to help her develop. And it doesn't finish that sentence in the interview, so I have no idea what they meant by that. Well, if you don't like anime, what about real celebrities, huh? I mean, what celebrity wouldn't want to be called an idiot at the opening of the game that they're in? I'm sure they were lining up in front of Nintendo for days.
Well, in the end, none of these were accepted by the producers, so they ended up making this. Yeah, welcome to hell. No, literally, that is the kanji for hell. This is Hellish Brain Age for the Nintendo DS featuring real demons. This is what the producers came back to after they finished working on the 3DS after March of 2010. And this looks, all good and fine, but these producers had a funny idea. Why don't we just make it all from scratch again? But this time on the 3DS. Doesn't that sound fun? And they even brought on a new programmer to help remake the game, Ito. Even though Ito ended up doing like 50 different roles by the end of development. Sorry, Ito. Alright, they're doing it. They're switching from the DS over to the 3DS. But while this was all happening, Kawashima decided to write a little book at the same time called Farewell Brain Boom. In this book, he discusses the fame that Brain Age had given him and the research that he had done, but also talked about people who called it, for lack of a better term, bullcrap. But I'm not here to talk about bullcrap, I'm here to talk about video games. And Kawashima did too. In the book, he discussed the third main entry in the Brain Age series, otherwise known as the game that they were currently working on, concentration training. The gap between the second and potential third game was attributed to a talk he had with Iwata, where they agreed that a new game in the series should only be made if there was a really special idea, which we now know did happen with the Olympics discovery. Now, Bandai Namco didn't give a crap, they just made a billion different versions of the same thing. But that's fine, it's cool. Kawashima then took a moment to make a bold statement that this third game would be released in late 2010, which definitely did not happen. No way. Now, the theory is that he assumed this game was going to be a launch title for the 3DS, since the console was also expected to release in late 2010. But neither the 3DS nor the game were released then. Instead, they were only at the beginning of Concentration Training's development. Okay, so let's get a little recap here. The team is now back on track, making the game for the 3DS, and since they were getting some boost to the system specs, they decided to put some more polish into the visuals to help differentiate the game from its easier counterpart on the DS. They also went ahead and loosened the difficulty a little bit, which was really nice. Originally, the game was set to be extremely strict with the exercise difficulty to keep you going at 100% at all times. And I'm sure the ones debugging the game were very happy to see a little bit of loosening there. Kitamura wanted to also add a bit of humor to the game for people to look forward to, since there wasn't really a lot to look forward to in the game at this point. So she drew up storyboards for the Brain seminars and Brain News, with humor similar to that in the Barbara manga, which, in case you didn't know, was a character that Kitamura designed herself. Some of her storyboards ended up being a bit too ridiculous for Brain Age though, so the funny ha-has were mostly saved for the end of the seminars. Now, speaking of these seminars, Dr. Kawashima's head actually speaks in this game.
You better believe it's tough.
That was a first. In fact, even in the Volcano Head days, he had voice acting. It was all added to help encourage you throughout the game, with more and more voice lines being added throughout development to help ease the tension. There was a point where they added too many lines, causing training sessions to be a bit more distracting with a lot more,
Okay, that's the stuff. Keep it up. Great. Good work.
That's why when you're doing well in the final game, Kawashima will shut up and let you focus. But if you make a mistake, he'll talk to you again to help you calm down.
Whoop. Don't panic.
Thank you. Voice lines were split into 4 categories: very strict, sometimes strict, kind, and very sarcastic. The development team liked the somewhat strict lines, so they used those in early builds, but the playtesters hated them. They felt like Kawashima was looking down on them, like he was actually mad when they made a mistake. So the team decided to tone down his lines a little. But then the new playtesters thought he was just being sarcastic. Oh man, that's amazing. Yeah, sure, whatever you say, Kawashima. Up until the very end of development, they were still revising and re-recording lines just to make sure people liked Kawashima in the game. They even switched from their original plan to have voice acting done by a team member to hiring a professional voice actor just to make sure that it didn't sound sarcastic. But what about the brain training specifically? Well, concentration training comes with a variety of new exercises, all of which were tested by Kawashima himself to make sure it burdened the gamer's working memory. They're mostly just variations of the original and-back exercises, called now devilish calculations, but with subtle differences, like instead of equations, it can be weird shapes. And then there were also span exercises, like block training. All of them could only be played once, and for only 5 minutes, and this was done for safety reasons. Kawashima had asked students to help his working memory studies quite a while ago, and one student in particular wanted intensive training. So Kawashima trained his working memory for 4 to 6 hours a day. And this student's brain shrunk. The capacity of their cerebral cortex had actually decreased. So, good luck on those tests you were studying for. The team wasn't really sure why this happened, but that's why there's a hard limit on how much devilish training you could do, so the devil don't get you and shrink your brain. Well, these exercises are difficult anyway. Who in their right mind would want to play it for 6 hours willingly? But don't worry, the developers tried making your 5 minutes a little bit more fun by adding like funny sound effects and visuals. Then realized, what's the point? It's supposed to be hard. Funny sound effects isn't gonna be any better. If it wasn't hard, it wouldn't be effective training. Now, there are other exercises other than devilish training, such as supplemental training, which is where the old style of Brain Age games found their home. Then there's relaxation mode, which consists of a germ buster, like the one from Brain Age 2, and then there's also blah blast and music appreciation, and yeah, that's it. And there is a reason for a lack of relaxation games. See, the development team wanted to make sure that there were relaxing games that were actually relaxing. You know, something that's a reward for your hard training. So they borrowed an optical topography device from Kawashima to verify if the activities were actually relaxing. The problem was that these new games they made, even when adding some nice relaxing music, were too stimulating for the brain to actually be considered relaxing. So what did they do with these games that failed the relaxation test? Well, Dr. Kawashima recommended they become additional brain training exercises. Of the 9 that are in the game, 6 of them were intended to be the relaxing ones, but ended up not being relaxing. Well, at least it was still nice to have those 3 relaxing games as a motivation to keep training. And another motivation besides all those unlocks you get over time was Street Pass integration. That's right, competition was added to Brain Age as a motivator. Excited you reached 4 back? Oh, that's so great. Little Timmy you passed by in the mall reached 99 back. And actually, yes, there is a 99 back in the game. That is the game's final level. And yeah, there's no way you're reaching that. The record at Kawashima's laboratory was 20. So you can pretty much play this as long as you like, and I don't think you're gonna hit that limit. And with all that crammed into the game, it was finally time to show it off in something called a Nintendo Direct. But only in Japan. For some reason, the February 26, 2012 Nintendo Direct was only 12 minutes in the US and over an hour in Japan, just because of all the exclusive stuff. And that is where they announced Brain Age concentration training along with our first footage of the game in action. It all looks incredibly similar, but there are some subtle differences, like the card missing its border and the text on top. Also, the subtitles show another difference. In the final game's intro, Kawashima says devilish training twice in a row. The first time saying, "Let's start devilish training," and the second time mentioning it as a topic for the next sentence when he asks you if the name sounds tough. But in the Nintendo Direct footage, he only says it once to announce that this is devilish training before asking if it sounds tough. I know it's subtle, but I don't know, I found it interesting. Also, your response bubble to that question is more see-through in the final version. The shelving unit in the back also has a couple changes, like it was originally a bit curvy on the top, and the glasses award, that was originally the Brain Award. But it honestly looks more like a loaf of bread award. It's also kind of weird to see Kawashima's mouth just like not move, and the pizzazz around his hand is missing too. As I said, it's all subtle differences. But once he reaches his devil form, woohoo, here come the changes. In the early version, he stays in his office instead of transporting to the devilish training room. And 2 exclamation marks instead of 1. Oh, whoa. He also looks just kind of angry in the Nintendo Direct footage, less so in the final. And those creepy hands, yeah, they used to be way creepier. And that's pretty much all they showed. Though with it, they did give a time frame for the release, summer of 2012, and they actually stuck to it. Let's go. The game released in Japan July 28th, 2012. But when it came to the US, they were a little off. They said it would originally release on December 3rd, 2012, but it got delayed. The funny thing is though, Nintendo didn't announce the delay until after December 3rd. Like, people went to the store to try to buy the game, and it just wasn't there. 2 days later, on December 5th, Nintendo finally revealed that the game was delayed with a new date set to February 10th, 2013, and they kept that promise. Now, Europe, that's a completely different story. It was planned to be released in early 2013, but no, it was delayed multiple times before finally getting a release date in 2017, with a launch finally happening exactly 5 years after its launch in Japan. Now, I'm sure you're asking what unused stuff is in concentration training. Well, it ain't much, except for one unused image that caught my mind. It's just some simple Japanese text with a file named after the main menu of the game. But what does it mean? Well, it's got multiple translations. The cutting room floor translates it to say, "You must give up now." But Google Translate thinks it's more of, "Giving up is the key." Well, I took it to Twitter, where I got a response saying that it means something more like, it's important to give up, in a way that's like a recommendation. In other words, it's an important life lesson from Dr. Kawashima. When it feels like things are spiraling out of control, it's okay to take some time off, breathe a little bit, process the situation, and if you want, come back with renewed vision. Or maybe it's the volcano guy saying that I suck and sarcastically telling me to give up. You know, context is very important.
I just gotta say it. I love this game. The voice acting, the fun cutscenes, the constant unlocks, the cozy graphics. And sure, it was all done to, sugarcoat the fact that the game literally hurts to play, but who doesn't love a little sugar? The game is charming. The way that it eases you in with simple explanations in a soft, soothing voice makes it very accessible. And you can just tell the developers poured all their energy into making something that at first glance doesn't exactly sound like a great game idea, but they turned into something that many people, myself included, have fond memories of to this day. That I would probably remember if I had actually focused more on training and less on the beautiful, chiseled features of Dr. Kawashima. Wow, look at all of these lovely producers. Did you know they're all supporters on Patreon? Did you know that each and every one of these people get new exclusive content every single week? It's true. In fact, you should go to the Beta64 Patreon because I just uploaded a behind the scenes video all about the episode that you just finished watching. Here, let me move out of the way so you can see the link. There, that one. Click that to check out the Patreon. Click this to subscribe because you're gonna want to, and click this for another epic Beta64 video to watch. Bye y'all, good to be back.